Welcome back to Rich Words Music, where today we're looking at this. It's the Harley Benton Aeolus, which is new in the Harley Benton catalogue for summer 2021. And while it might look a little bit like a cross between a Gibson Les Paul and a 335, there's a lot more to the Aeolus than meets the eye. So what we're going to do in this video then is I will go through the various features and specifications of the instrument, and there is a lot to go through there. Then we'll play a bunch of different sounds on it across my favourite styles and genres. We'll go from classic cleans all the way through to down-tuned metal if the guitar can handle it, and afterwards I will give you my conclusions on the instrument and tell you if I think it's worth the money. A quick caveat though, Harley Benton did send this guitar to me to make the video. I'm not getting paid to make the video, and I don't even know if I get to keep the instrument after making it, but just so you guys know and we're on a level playing field, we can get into the rest of the video now. So when I first picked up the Aeolus, I was struck by a couple of specific things. The first being that yes, it really does look like a cross between a Les Paul and a 335. More specifically, it looks like the limited edition Gibson Les Paul ES models, which are the semi-hollow Les Pauls with F-holes. This guitar does look very similar to that indeed, although I think Harley Benton has added modern touches to it that differentiate it from a Les Paul too. Now, I don't have a Gibson Les Paul ES, but I do have an Epiphone Les Paul that I can just pull up here so you guys can see how similar they look just at first glance. The bodies are actually the same thickness, but the body of the Aeolus from the front is slightly larger, so it's slightly wider, fatter, I should say, across the lower bout here, and in the vertical direction here, it's slightly longer than the Les Paul too. So it has a slightly larger body, and because it's hollow here and here with the center block, what we can possibly expect is maybe a warmer, more open sound than that from the solid mahogany body of the Les Paul. I unfortunately also don't yet own a Gibson 335 or a 339, but what I do have is an Ibanez Artcore, which is very similar in terms of vibe. Yeah, imagine this one not in blue but in a vintage sunbursty finish, and you would get something very similar looking indeed. It looks like its bigger, more elegant cousin in a way. There's a couple of other guitars that the Aeolus reminds me of at first glance. One would be the Epiphone Alicat, which is a more kind of limited edition Epiphone model that is occasionally produced, and the most striking to me would be the Fret King Elise. Now, Fret King is a brand that was designed by Mr. Trev Wilkinson, who a lot of you guys will know, especially if you've watched my channel before. But basically the Elise is like a double cutaway version of this. It's again a cross between possibly a Les Paul and a 335, 339. It has similar pickup configurations, it has a very similar kind of vibe, and because it's Wilkinson, it has innovative features that the Aeolus and that Harley Benton also kind of use. So let's go into some of those features and specifications then, because there's a lot to cover with the Aeolus. Now, Harley Benton say that this guitar looks like a traditional guitar, but actually has a lot in it that makes it a modern, featured, very practical 21st century rock and roll machine, and I actually kind of believe that. When you go through the spec sheet, there's a lot to go through, so I might have to read some of it off, and I hope I don't forget anything. Let's start with the body then, because we've already talked about that. Now, what we have here is a beautiful Bengal Flame sunburst finish. It looks like a vintage tobacco sunburst to me, a very classic look, and the top is AAA flame maple veneer, and as I twist it around the different angles there, you can see that the flame maple top catches the light in very different, very pleasing ways to me anyway. It looks very nice indeed. There is a second finish available for the Aeolus. That's a satin one, which is referred to as frosted flame, and I have to say I do like satin guitars very much. They're a lot easier to put on video, that's for sure, especially when you've got bright lights, but I really like this classic Bengal Flame finish. So it's a maple veneer top then. The rest of the body is mahogany, and it's painted black on the back there. Seeing as we're round at the back here, you can see that one of these modern touches is the heel joint here. You can see it slopes down there, and that gives you better upper fret access than you'd expect from a traditional Les Paul style instrument. Also on the front here, on the lower horn, you've got a slight little chamfer, I think it's called, almost where the wood has been shaved away, again to give you slightly better upper fret access. That's something you also don't see on a Les Paul. On the Harley Benton website, this looks like a very large space that you've got here, but it's a lot more subtle in person, which I actually prefer to look at it. So that's what you've got there in terms of upper fret access on the body. Here we have the two F-holes, and we've got a natural coloured binding running around the edge of the body, but there's no real treatment to the inside of the F-holes there. Now, I'll put some photos in when we talk about this later, but this is also one of the downsides of the guitar for me. You can see that some of the work inside the guitar there is a little bit rough, but as I said, photos coming up in the part after the playing. Here we've got the two controls. here we've got a volume control and a tone control. 2 pickups here, and the pickups are Tesla brand, not made by Elon Musk. I did a little bit of digging and found out that Tesla is a brand that's been going for quite a few years now. They make fairly affordable pickups, I would say, and this being Harley Benton, you wouldn't be expecting a more boutique brand of pickups. But the pickups here are very, very versatile indeed. They're VR5 Alnico humbuckers, and they're splittable via the tone knob there. So you pull them up to access a single coil mode, push them down to have them in full humbucking mode here. We've got WSC hardware there, which is not Wilkinson, it's WSC, a slightly different brand made in China. Here we've got a 3-way selector switch to go between bridge, neck, and the 2 pickups together. Black hardware, black pickup rings here. And if you just look at the end of the neck there, here we've got access to the truss rod, and that's a more modern feature. On a traditional Les Paul, you would expect to access the truss rods for doing setups here at the top of the neck rather than at the heel there. So that's the body of the guitar. Let's move to the neck now. You can see that it looks like a quite light brown here, and what we're actually dealing with here is roasted maple. So the neck itself, the back part of the neck, is a 1-piece roasted maple, and the front is also roasted maple too. So it's a roasted maple neck with roasted maple fingerboard. The neck is a satin finish, and it's a lovely, kind of fairly chunky C shape. It's very, very comfortable indeed, and everything seems to have been done very well with it. Now we've got 22 medium jumbo stainless steel frets on the guitar here. So again, stainless steel frets is not something you would expect normally in a budget guitar price range, but we've got them here. They feel very big for medium jumbo frets. They feel very comfortable indeed, but again, we'll talk more about that in the conclusions part. Afterwards, the fret dot markers here on the side of the neck are also glow in the dark. I haven't had this guitar in the dark yet, but if you're on stage playing a gig, that can be an absolute godsend. So we've got the standard mother of pearl style fret markers here on the fretboard, dot style. And if we move up to the headstock here, we start with a Graph Tech TUSQ nut in black, and we've got Grover locking tuners on this guitar. That's very, very practical indeed. They should hold their tune very, very well, and they should make the guitar very, very easy to restring. Now, when it comes to the rest of the neck action, we've got fairly modern appointments in that we've got a scale length that is 25 inches. So we're kind of between Gibson and Fender. It's a very nice scale length. The fingerboard radius, so that's the curvature of the fingerboard radius, is just under 14 inches, so 350 millimeters. So that's a very, very flat board, which should make it easy to be playing solos and stuff like that. It should also make it easy for playing modern kinds of music and playing fast across that neck. Not something I do very much, but if you play fast, you'll be at home on this neck. It's also something that you don't really expect from a semi-hollow kind of guitar, which is more traditional in thought and appearance and specs. So this is where we've got this kind of mishmash with the Aeolus between traditional and innovation. I guess I should finally mention that the action as came from Harley Benton is very, very nice indeed. It's about a millimeter, between a millimeter and a millimeter and a half on the fat E string, and less, about a millimeter on the 12th fret at the high E string. So a very, very good action indeed. They say that the guitar comes with the Addario strings, but that's a moot point anyway, because I bet most of you will change strings as a first course of action when you get the guitar. So those are the specifications of the guitar then, and now it's time to play it and hear how it sounds. Now, this guitar can make a lot of very different noises, so what we're going to do is play a bunch of different riffs in my favorite styles. We'll go from country to folk to indie to rock to heavy rock, alternative rock, and maybe even some metal at the end. My rig for today is going to be my Hughes & Kettner Black Spirit 200 head, which I will keep on the clean channel at all times. We'll start with just the guitar going into the clean amp. We'll then turn on my Wampler Pantheon overdrive pedal, and I'll gradually increase the gain and chunkiness on that pedal all the way up to kind of some pretty heavy rock, and at the very end we'll engage my Rev G3 pedal to do some down-tuned drop D metal stuff, and we'll see if the Aeolus can chug. I'm not going to make this a super long video. I'm not going to play every single guitar riff on every different pickup setting and on humbucking and split coil mode. What I will do for the clean sounds and the crunch sounds is give you an overview of that, going across all the different pickup settings and doing humbucking and split coil modes. But for the rest of the riffs, I'll choose the pickup settings that I think best suit it, and you'll always have a note there telling you which pickups and which humbuckers or single coils are operating at one time. Now, one other thing to say is, if you're looking at where this switch is, don't be confused. Now, I think it's been wired the wrong way. Normally, when you're playing a guitar like this, when you have the pickup selector switch down, that symbolizes the bridge pickup. On this case, it's the opposite way around. So when it's up, I'm on the bridge, middle is middle. When it's down, I'm on the neck. Confusing? Yes. But as I said, there will be text to show you exactly where we are for every single riff. And ask me in the comments if you're confused, and I will give you some answers there. But enough talk. This is the Harley Benton Aeolus. Let's hear it now, and I will give you my personal conclusions about it afterwards. Okay then, so we've just been listening to the Harley Benton Aeolus, and I hope you enjoyed the variety of tones I was able to get out of that guitar. Now, I have to say straight from the off that I've been blown away with how versatile this instrument is, and it kind of takes me back to my first idyllic days of playing electric guitar, because when I first got into the instrument I wasn't familiar with Strats and Tellys and Les Pauls and 335s. I just thought that one day I would be able to find one instrument that would do everything I ever wanted it to do, and that was it. Yeah, how naive I was. Now I have a Telly for my Telly stuff, I got a Les Paul for my Les Paul stuff. I've got different guitars that do different things and do them very well, but they don't do other stuff. And this is where the Aeolus is kind of coming in and filling a gap there. It does absolutely everything, and I hope you agree with me that from the playing samples, what you've just heard through the compression of YouTube and everything else, it just manages to do everything to a very, very high level indeed. So right from the off, amazed at this guitar's versatility and that it handles everything from country to folk and from indie to rock, all the way through to progressive rock and even heavier stuff very, very well. But let's go into a bit more detail on what I think about the individual facets of this guitar and whether or not it's worth it for the money. I'll go back again to that first experience when I was getting the guitar out of the box and say that right from the off I was very impressed with how it looks. I really like the kind of classiness of the single cut vibe with the old school almost flame maple top to it, and I was really intrigued as to how it was going to work with the more modern neck with the roasted maple and the modern kind of size and shape of the neck as well. So that was the first thing that intrigued me, and as soon as I started to play I was in a zone where I realized that this was probably the first guitar that's ever really done that for me. I referred to a number of other instruments that I feel that the Aeolus is paying an homage to, or is possibly just a little bit similar to, and it does something different from all of those. So it's different from a standard Les Paul in that it just has that more open, hollow body, semi-hollow kind of a vibe. It does things that a Les Paul won't do. And by that same definition, it does many things that a 335 or a 339 or another semi-hollow won't really do. And the other instruments that I talked about as well, the Alley Cat by Epiphone, that won't do heavier high gain stuff very well. And the Fret King Elise model, for example, that's a much more classic feeling instrument that doesn't have the more modern features of the neck that the Aeolus had. So this guitar is kind of occupying an almost unique territory for me. It's crossing over so many different genres and doing them to a very high level, and I'm yet to experience personally another guitar that can do that. If you guys watching this know of another instrument that can compete in the versatility stakes with the Aeolus, please write it in the comments and I will absolutely have to go and check that guitar or those guitars out, because I'm very impressed with the wide range of stuff that this guitar just seems to be able to do. So on to the sounds then. This guitar really did go everywhere that I wanted it to, and it probably does a whole lot more that I personally don't play, and does it very well too. Everything from the squeakiest of the cleanest cleans all the way through to the Rev G3 down-tuned distortion and the modern metal I tried to do, the chugging as well. It handled it with gusto, and there was more in the tank, I think, for all of those genres. I was so impressed with how it managed that. Big up to the Tesla pickups there then, because these VR2s did an absolutely stellar job. When I first plugged in the guitar for the first 10 or so seconds until I realized that the selector switch is wired the wrong way, I was thinking there's no way these pickups are going to be able to keep up with what this guitar claims to be able to do. They're just not going to handle it. They're going to be fluffy and woolly, and they're just not going to have the definition that I want. But overall, once I realized that this was wired the wrong way around and got everything dialed in, they absolutely are incredibly versatile. And every kind of sound that I played felt authentic. It felt like I was able to get genuine country tones. It felt like the single coil clean stuff was really, really vintage sounding, and I got a lovely warm, mellow neck humbucker sound too for the cleaner stuff. When we went to the classic rock as well, I was getting lovely, punchy, mid-rangey sort of tones. And when I went to the indie too, the indie is possibly the genre where I felt least at home on this guitar, conversely, because a lot of my favorite indie bands, let's think about people I played rip-offs of, like Mando Diao and Kings of Leon, those guys like to use 335s, and conversely I was not getting the best 335 tones with the Aeolus, but that might just be a bit more dialing in is needed on my part. Once we went up to the heavier and more modern rock stuff, I kind of imagined that the semi-hollow nature of the guitar and the fact that these were unknown Tesla pickups to me would mean that I wouldn't be able to get it as tight as I wanted. I wouldn't be able to get kind of the low-end thump that I wanted, while at the same time having a top-end clarity. But I got that, and it was so good at doing that. And even flicking over to the single coil mode for the alternative rock stuff sounded really, really good. And these Tesla pickups are not that noisy at all, even on the single coil mode. When I engage the Rev G3, that always comes with its own rev sound. It always does what it says on the tin, and I absolutely thought that you could play a metal gig with this guitar. A little bit more dialing in, slightly more of a metal amp perhaps, and just using that G3 to the best of its abilities, and you could fool people into thinking that this was a full-blown metal axe. It was really, really impressive. I'm gushing here, but I really, really enjoyed all of the sounds that I got and had so much fun playing with this guitar in all the different genres that I tried. I want to talk about the build quality and the hardware used on the guitar as well, because I think that's always worth talking about. Now, when a guitar promises so much at such a price point, you feel like corners have to be cut somewhere and money has to be saved, because you just can't get these kind of specifications for 400 euros or whatever this costs in your local currency. But I've been very, very impressed with the build quality and with every single fixture that's been used on this guitar. I will list a couple of negative points towards the end, but for now, the rest of it. First off, no problems whatsoever with any of the hardware. Grover locking tuners on a guitar at this price point, absolutely fantastic. If you can have them, you should have them. I mean, if you're a traditionalist and you insist on not having locking tuners for whatever reason, that's fine too, but they're just here for this price point, and I would recommend it to anybody to have them on a guitar if you can, because they just make your life as a player easier and let you focus more on playing. This this roasted maple neck and the roasted maple fingerboard, they're modern feeling, but the beautiful smooth satin feeling of the neck and the fingerboard, they just work very well in tandem and they feel so playable. They work well with the stainless steel frets too. In terms of a setup, the action is very, very low, very, very nice, straight from the shop, and the stainless steel frets have been cut and crowned very well indeed. Those stainless steel frets, of course, will last for life. This guitar will never need refretting, no matter how much you play it. Yeah, the 43mm Graph Tech TUSQ nut has been well cut as well, so this guitar came set up really well from the shop. No problems whatsoever with any of that. I've already talked about the sounds of the pickups, but in terms of the quality of the hardware on the body too, no issues whatsoever with the WSC bridge. The volume and tone controls, totally fine. They do what they should do. You can hear in the tests that you have a nice smooth taper on the volume and on the tone. I do wonder perhaps that if I'm doing a lot of push-pulling on that tone pot for years to come, that might at some point break and have to be replaced, but not a problem. The one issue that we have with the quality control here, of course, is the fact that this has been wired, presumably, in the opposite direction. I've watched a couple of other videos on the Aeolus now, and I've seen that most people do indeed seem to be on the bridge pickup when the switch is down like this, as you would expect from a guitar of this type. Not a difficult thing to fix, and I will get that sorted at some point, but now I'm used to it, and it doesn't bother me for this review. It's something I wanted to mention, and I think it is worth mentioning, but it's not a deal breaker in any way. When it comes to the fit and finish of the rest of the guitar, absolutely full marks apart from one thing. I think that the Bengal Flame finish has been beautifully applied. I really like the black back there. I really like the way the neck has been finished. I really like the paint job. I love the color of that burst. The one thing that I've said is not that great is if you take a look at the picture, which I should be adding in right about now, looking inside the F-hole here, you can see that the work inside the body has not been finished in that cleaner way. Again, I'm assuming that this is something that simply can't be checked at the price points Harley Benton are working at. I mean, if you add in an extra check there, if you add in an extra load of binding for the insides of the F-holes there, you're going to start to see the budgets creeping up and up and up. And again, Harley Benton wants to keep their prices down and make the best they can to a certain price point. All that said and done then, how does the Aeolus match up in the price and value for money stakes? Well, this guitar costs 400 euros, 399 euros at time of filming, so that's roughly going to be similar whether you buy it in dollars or in pounds, plus minus shipping, customs, etc. But for what you get, I'm kind of amazed actually. I know I have to talk in this video, but if I could be, I would just be speechless. I would just kind of sit there for a few minutes just taking it all in, because after the first time I finished playing this guitar, I just sat with it for a few minutes and kind of looked at it. I turned it over in my hands and checked out this beautiful neck and thought about the Grovers that are on it and thought about those pickups and the options that you have with it, and thought that for 400 euros, what else is there out there right now on the market that comes close? Again, if you guys are watching and you know of something that comes close in these stakes, please write it in the comments so I can go and check out that guitar as well, because I feel like this guitar is really one of the market leaders right now. When you think about the 400 euro price point on the Aeolus, that's kind of competing with Squier Classic Vibe in terms of price. That's kind of competing with some of the lower end Epiphones. There are other guitars from makers like Chord, for example, that come in at around 400 that are very impressive indeed. But again, I'm struggling to come up with one that really reaches, in terms of versatility, what the Aeolus can do. Now, I do want to talk about some negative features with this guitar, some things that I don't like that much, because there are a few things. You can't have everything perfect, and for 400 euros, if it was perfect, I'd be very shocked indeed, and the guitar industry would be on its knees. So the first thing would be the thing that I was disturbed about the most, and that I've mentioned already. It's the fact that the work inside the F-hole here is pretty rough. As I said, again, I think it's a check that Harley Benton doesn't need to do for the price, but it disturbed me when I saw it, and I thought, you know, I'd like to not see that on my guitars if possible. Another thing when it comes to the fit and finish, in terms of negative points, for me it's a taste thing, but I would have preferred to see some binding inside the F-holes there. It's not been done badly here or anything, it's just been covered in poly, and I think that if they would have done kind of some of this natural wood binding there, yes, it would have made the guitar more expensive, but it just would have looked nicer. That's all. That's just a thing I would quite like to see. The final thing which is kind of wrong with the guitar, in that I feel like it's been wired up wrong, is the selector switch, which I've mentioned a couple of times. Again, not going to be an issue to get that changed, but it's the kind of thing where if there was an extra QC test at the factory, the guitar wouldn't have come out to me like this. I have to say as well, just on a positive side to that whole story, you know, when guitars get sent out to people to make YouTube videos, we assume that the brands always check out the guitars and make sure that they're only sending out the very best of what they can do. Well, I truly believe that Harley Benton haven't really done that with this. They've just let me get a luck of the draw almost, because if they'd checked the guitar over and made sure that I got the best one, surely they wouldn't have let that happen, would they? Maybe something to think about. And, you know, the whole YouTubers getting better guitars than non-YouTubers, that's a discussion for another video, perhaps, but just something I thought I would bring up here. Two more things I want to mention that I don't like that much. The first thing, it's not really a problem once you get round it, but when you flick between humbucker and single coil mode, there is quite a difference in the outputs of the two pickup types. Obviously the humbuckers are a bit louder. Not a problem if you know what you're doing and once you get into it, but it took me a while to realize that I would need to find a solution for that. If I was going to be playing live and flicking between the two, I would need some kind of a boost pedal. I would need to run my amp slightly hotter to compensate for that with the single coil pickups. Of course, single coil pickups do have less output than humbuckers anyway, but there you go. It's definitely something that if you want that authentic single coil twang, which you do get from this guitar, you're going to have to put up with. Yeah, and the very last thing that I don't like that much, but is not a deal breaker either, is the name of the guitar. I think it's Aeolus. It could be Aeolus or Aeolus or something similar. I apologize to anybody who knows what it actually is if I've been butchering it all the way through, but I think it is Aeolus. I googled the name and it turns out that Aeolus is actually the Greek god of moderately priced single cut instruments. No, he's not. He's the god of wind. And I think maybe that's what they were going for, because this is a semi-hollow guitar. You've got the F-holes here. It's giving you maybe an airy tone, and that's where they were thinking, yeah, maybe extra wind is blowing through, especially if you're playing outdoor shows or something like that. Whatever. Not a huge problem, the name, especially when it's written down, but it's hard for me to say, and yeah, I just feel a simpler name could have perhaps done the guitar slightly more justice. Again, unless there is a meaning behind the word Aeolus that I don't know. If you know it and I'm misinformed, please write that in the comments. But that's it for this video. I know this has been a long one, but there is so much to say about this guitar that can do so much. And for the price that you pay, for the specifications and features that you get, and the sounds that you can make with it, would I recommend it? Absolutely, 100%. If you're looking for a versatile workhorse that can do everything from telly twang all the way through to classic rock and even heavy stuff as well, if you're going to do a session or if you're playing a covers gig, you could genuinely take this one guitar and do it all. Look, I know that if you're only going to be playing Nashville telly sounds, a telly will do a telly better than anything else. If you absolutely need a Les Paul, or if you absolutely need an Explorer or some single kind of genre specific guitar, you could go for that. But I really think that the Aeolus is as close as any other instrument I've ever seen as authentically covering so many different genres of music with one instrument. I'm really, really impressed with it. And I said at the start of the video, I don't even know if I get to keep the guitar, but I kind of really hope that Harley Benton let me keep it, because I don't want to have to send it back at the end of all of this. If you guys have any more questions about this guitar, feel free to write me in the comments and I will answer them to the best of my ability. I think I'm also going to do a video or two more where I compare this guitar to others. I'm definitely going to run it up against the Epiphone Les Paul and the Ibanez Artcore, which I showed you earlier. But are there other guitars that you'd like to hear me A-B against this one? Perhaps perhaps my SG with P90s, perhaps my Esquire or Telecaster, perhaps something else. Let me know if you'd like to hear and see that. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. That's it for today though. I've been Rich for Rich Words Music, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.